the late 90s, my friends and I gathered at the only park in our small, sleepy town in southern New Mexico. The word had spread like wildfire. Someone had brought a Ouija board. For many of us, it was a curiosity, a relic of superstition that none had ever dared to see in person. That day, it was there, in the heart of our quiet town, waiting for someone to give it life. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, two brave souls decided to take the plunge. They placed their fingers on the planchette, a mix of excitement and trepidation in the air. But nothing happened. After a few failed attempts and some skeptical laughter, people began to drift away, unimpressed and disappointed. That's when my cousin and I decided to give it a shot. We approached the board with a mix of curiosity and something more, a sense of seriousness that had been missing before. We asked our first question, and at first there was nothing but silence. But then, as if awakened by our intent, the planchette began to move. My cousin and I locked eyes, our disbelief mirrored in each other's gaze. The board started answering questions it couldn't possibly know the answers to. Personal questions, deeply buried secrets that sent chills down our spines. The atmosphere grew heavier with each answer, and soon the board's tone turned sinister. It began to threaten our friends, even cursing them with a malevolent certainty. The words it spelled out were so dark, so filled with venom, that out of respect for those involved, I won't repeat them. But those curses weren't just idle threats. They were fulfilled years later. We stopped, our hands trembling as we pulled away. We had seen enough, but as the night wore on, something strange happened. I found myself walking home with the board in my possession. To this day, I don't remember how or why I took it, but the curiosity that had sparked earlier now burned like a fever. I wanted answers, and I was willing to take risks to get them. So I did something reckless. I lived just a block away from the only cemetery in town, and in the dead of night, I decided to play the Ouija board there. Midnight, under a sky full of cold stars, I sat near the gravestones and placed my fingers on the planchette. I asked my questions, half expecting nothing to happen. I wanted to prove to myself that my cousin had somehow been playing tricks on me. But the planchette moved, answering questions that I hadn't even spoken aloud. It was as if the board had a mind of its own, a sinister consciousness that knew my innermost thoughts. That's when I knew it was real. Terrifyingly, undeniably real. I stopped immediately, filled with a sudden dread, and took the board back to its owner the next day, telling him what had happened. He laughed it off, not believing a word. I thought that was the end of it, but I couldn't have been more wrong. It was only the beginning. That night, I went to bed, my mind racing with the day's events. I had touched something dark, something that wasn't meant to be disturbed, and I knew it. I lay there in the dark, feeling the weight of what I had done, until finally, sleep took me. But it wasn't peaceful. I awoke in the dead of night, my body frozen in place. Standing in the middle of my room was a dark figure. A little girl, her form barely distinguishable in the shadows. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't move, couldn't scream. This was my first encounter with sleep paralysis, but it felt more than that. This was a visitation. I prayed, the words stumbling out in my mind, desperate for release. And finally, as if the force holding me down had relented, I could move again. I jumped up, heart racing, and saw the figure dart beneath a nearby table. I scrambled to turn on the light, and as soon as the room was illuminated, the figure was gone. The figure had resembled my younger sister, who was only 4 at the time. Terrified, I rushed to my parents' room, where she still slept. There she was, sound asleep beside them. The chill of realization ran through me. What I had seen wasn't my sister. It was something else, something far more sinister. The next morning, I told my parents what I had seen. They dismissed it, their frustration evident as soon as I mentioned the Ouija board. Their marriage had already been strained, but this seemed to make things worse. Over time, their relationship deteriorated, eventually ending in divorce. Later, someone told me that these things, these dark forces, can tear apart families, destroy relationships, and prey on the vulnerable. But it didn't end there. I couldn't escape it. Time passed, and strange things began to happen, not just in my home, but wherever I went. It felt as though something had attached itself to me, feeding off my fear, dragging me down into despair. I became sick, depressed, and even suicidal. My life was a spiral, and my very soul felt like it was being consumed by the darkness. Desperate, I turned back to what I had once known. I prayed, clinging to the last shred of hope. I picked up the Bible again, read its words, and went to church. It helped, but the darkness still lingered, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. It haunted my every step, waiting for the moment I would give in. And then one day, I had enough. After breakfast, I drove to the river, a small, quiet stream that trickled through the heart of our town. I knelt by the water's edge, the world silent around me, and I prayed with all my strength. I called out to the darkness that had plagued me, dared it to come forth so that I could face it and cast it out. It was a challenge, a final stand against the evil that had tormented me for so long. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. I felt the air grow cold, as if the darkness was gathering, ready to strike. But then something incredible happened. A presence, warm, comforting, and powerful, descended upon me. It was the presence of God, a light so pure that it banished the darkness in an instant. In that moment, I felt the darkness shatter, its hold on me broken. The weight that had pressed down on my soul lifted, and a profound peace filled the void it left behind. I knew then that the battle was over. The darkness that had once strangled me was gone, banished in a flash of divine light. I stood by the river, the water gently flowing past, and felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't known in years. The light had triumphed, and I was finally free. You see, this isn't just a story, it's a testament to the power of light over darkness, to the reality of forces beyond our understanding. I don't just believe in God and the devil, I've faced them both. And if there's one thing I know with absolute certainty, it's this. No matter how deep the darkness, the light will always prevail. So I'm not here to convince you. Whether you believe or not is up to you. But remember, there are battles being fought every day in places seen and unseen for things far more precious than we can imagine. When the time comes, which side will you choose?